In Hamburg, Germany, a group of youths dressed as cartoon clowns waltzed into a gourmet supermarket, filled their carts with caviar and champagne, handed the cashier a rose, and walked out to distribute the luxury items to the city's poor. In Prato, Italy, the reaction to economic strain took a darker turn. Vigilante mobs roamed the streets at night, attacking undocumented migrant workers. After the 2008 financial crash, Prato's tolerance for migrant labor evaporated. The political left was swept aside by the Northern League, while figures like Silvio Berlusconi mobilized the city's anger, labeling migrants an army of evil. These events represent two sides of the same macroeconomic shift. The industrial working class, the proletariat, has been displaced by a structural process called precariatization. This is the intentional habituation of a growing segment of the population to a life of unstable, insecure labor as the permanent norm. The precariat is distinct from the long-term unemployed or an underclass. While an underclass is a drag on accumulation, the precariat is a functional necessity for global capitalism, acting as its mobile, highly flexible, light infantry. To see how this class functions, we have to look past the traditional hierarchy of upper, middle, and working class. Globalization has fractured that system into 7 distinct socioeconomic layers. At the peak is the elite, a small group of billionaires operating as global citizens. Below them is the salariat, who still enjoy long-term employment security, state pensions, and extensive corporate benefits. In the middle are the proficients, professionals and technicians who leverage their skills for high-paying, project-based work, though they face a high risk of burnout. They sit just above the shrinking core of the old industrial working class. Beneath that core is the swelling 5th layer, the precariat. They are detached from the security of the tiers above them, positioned just over the unemployed and the lumpen underclass. By relying on 20th century labor statistics, governments hide the reality of this 7-tier structure. Those old metrics fail to capture the specific form of economic anxiety that defines the precariat's existence. The precariat is defined by the absence of 7 specific labor securities, ranging from employment protection to income stability. They lack an occupational narrative. They cannot define their lives through a career that builds over time. They lack what Hannah Arendt called a social memory, the sense of belonging to a community with inherited ethics and values. This turns them into denizens, individuals who live within a state but are denied the full range of rights granted to a citizen. This status produces 4 psychological drivers. The first is anxiety, fueled by chronic, uninsurable uncertainty. The second is anomie, the despair that arises when the path to social mobility is effectively blocked. Third is alienation, the friction of being forced to do work that ignores your skills. These 3 culminate in the 4th, anger. This is the energy that drives primitive rebellions, like the Occupy movement. This class is divided into 3 factions. The atavistic look back to the lost security of their parents' generation. The instrumental, often migrants, see labor purely as a survival tool. Then there is the third group, young, educated, and deeply frustrated. When you combine high levels of education with the pressures of the 4 A's, you create a demographic that is increasingly likely to challenge established political and economic orders. The origin of this class lies in neoliberal market liberalization, which trebled the global labor supply in a single generation. Over 1 billion new workers entered the market from countries like China and India, prepared to labor for as little as 1/30th of the wages paid in the West. This created a pressure toward convergence. Either Western jobs would migrate to low-wage regions, or Western wages would have to fall to remain competitive. To manage this, Western governments made a Faustian bargain. They subsidized low-wage labor through tax credits and encouraged a massive buildup of consumer debt to hide the decline in real purchasing power. This bargain effectively postponed the economic consequences of wage stagnation by building up private debt and depleting individual savings. When the 2008 crash arrived, it exposed the fact that systemic risks had been shifted from the institutions onto the worker. Global capital accelerated this shift through 3 forms of labor flexibility. Numerical flexibility rolled back protections against dismissal, while wage system flexibility stripped away enterprise benefits. This created a divergence in total compensation. While the salariat continued to gain paid holidays and pensions, the precariat was reduced to pure money wages, losing the non-wage benefits that once formed a large part of worker income. The third mechanism is functional flexibility, which highlights the difference between employment security, having a contract, and job security, which is having control over your specific role. At France Telecom, workers retained their employment contracts, but constant forced department changes destroyed their job security. The resulting psychological stress was linked to a wave of employee suicides. These changes are supported by state re-regulation. In 1980, fewer than 1 in 20 American workers needed a professional license to work. Today, that requirement applies to more than 1 in 3. In the UK, the Tesco law allowed corporations to take control of the legal profession. Now, supermarkets can offer automated divorce forms through legal services assistants, a new subclass of paralegals who have no path into the actual legal profession. These three flexibilities work together to create a structural barrier, engineering a class of workers who are permanently excluded from the possibility of upward mobility. The social safety net was similarly restructured, moving from universal support to means testing designed to separate the deserving from the undeserving poor. This creates a poverty trap. When a person on assistance takes a low-wage job, the loss of state benefits results in an effective marginal tax rate of 80% or higher, double what is paid by the middle class. Governments then added behavioral testing. In dozens of U.S. states, welfare applicants must pass mandatory urine tests, and in a further layer of demeaning friction, they are often forced to pay the $150 fee for the test themselves. This leads to the precarity trap. A worker might spend months in a bureaucratic queue to secure benefits. Taking a 3-week temporary job can reset that entire process, leaving them without income for months if the job ends unexpectedly. Education has been commodified into this same system. Universities now function as factories for degrees, producing graduates who hold increasingly valueless lottery tickets in a labor market that cannot absorb them. This existence is consumed by tertiary time, unpaid work required just to remain labor-ready. The precariat must spend hours retraining, networking, and navigating state bureaucracies, work for which they are never remunerated. By exhausting the workers' time and locking them into the precarity trap, these systems neutralize the capacity for sustained political organization. The demographics most vulnerable to this engineering are youth, women in casualized roles, the disabled, and the criminalized. Migrants form the largest group. They have transitioned from permanent settlers into nomadic succulents, workers who move circularly between cultures without ever gaining full citizen rights. This is allowed for labor export regimes, where states organize the mass movement of workers and convicts to work on short-term global infrastructure projects. For example, when a Chinese state corporation won a contract to build Polish highways, they brought in their own labor force as part of the deal. The project was ultimately subsidized by European Union taxpayer funds, showing how international institutions actively support the expansion of the precariat. As the current phase of financial capitalism strains under its own weight, society is being pushed toward one of two political pathways. The first is the politics of inferno, the rise of the panopticon state. Here, stability is maintained through mass surveillance and a utilitarian logic that justifies the misery of a minority to preserve the happiness of the majority. This path relies on libertarian paternalism and the use of state nudge units. Experts engineer citizen choices through subtle incentives and penalties, assuming the individual is incapable of making rational decisions. This leads to the commodification of politics itself. As citizens become disenfranchised, the frustrated factions of the precariat are easily drawn to the populist sirens of neo-fascism. The inferno thrives by keeping the precariat focused on demonizing strangers and migrants, preventing them from addressing the structural mechanisms that ensure their insecurity. The alternative is a politics based on recognition, representation, and redistribution. The precariat must move beyond resistance and toward building formal collective agency. The core solution is a universal basic income. Granting every citizen an unconditional floor of financial security provides the agency needed to refuse exploitative labor and reclaim control over their time. These programs can be funded through sovereign wealth funds. By taxing monopolies and superprofits, following the model of the Alaska Permanent Fund, capital can be pooled and redistributed to every member of society. Finally, we must reclaim the civic commons. Public parks, libraries, and community spaces are the shared assets that provide a sense of stability and belonging to those the market has marginalized. The precariat is a dangerous class because it challenges the fundamental assumptions of both the old left and the neoliberal right. We must proactively engineer this politics of paradise, or the default will remain the inferno.